This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Our thoughtful bold leader today joins us from Wiltshire, a county in the southern part of England. She is an accomplished global corporate executive and board chair. A shoemaker's daughter, with her mother's flair for the theatre, she transitioned from a mathematician and award-winning research engineer into a global corporate executive with 2 honorary doctorates from Sheffield and Newcastle universities in the United Kingdom. After our conversation last year, she stepped on towards the end of the year as vice chair of MasterCard, looking after 3 billion customers worldwide. Just prior, she was president of international markets with customer oversight in 200 countries. She spent 20 plus years in financial services with corporations like ABN AMRO, Citigroup, and Alvarez and Marcel. She has served on multiple boards, including Lightrock, AstraZeneca, ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, and Charity Bank. As a champion of change for women empowerment, she is chair of the 30% Club and the Financial Alliance for Women. She is also the lead non-exec director for the UK government's Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Stay tuned as she shares with us how maths and the theatre shaped her corporate career, why visiting Nelson Mandela's prison cell changed her thinking, and why and how corporates in the world today need to take the lead in this troubled, unjust, and challenged world. We warmly welcome Anne Cairns, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future.
And it's so wonderful to have you with us today to be part of this conversation. It's a real privilege to have you share your wisdom.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, talking to another Anne.
Absolutely. And also one with a British heritage, I might add. So,
Yeah.
Really great to do that. You've had such a remarkable life. You've been a pioneering woman of note, a young research scientist. You've broken many glass ceilings in your life. And I was wondering, in terms of your early childhood and what shaped you, can you take us back in time?
I had quite a poor upbringing in the north of England. I grew up in a mining town, and my father wasn't a miner. He was actually a shoemaker. And I think one of the things that made me successful over the years was I had 2 very loving parents. I'm the middle child. I had an elder brother and a younger sister, and a very close family. And my father particularly always said to me that I could be anything I wanted to be. And that was, a really good male role model to grow up with. And my mom was always very theatrical and sent me to dancing classes and singing classes and lots of things like this that actually develop stage confidence and confidence in yourself. So it was a great upbringing, actually.
That's wonderful. And in that childhood, that's a real interesting. You talk about the stage, the exposure to the theatre, and being such a remarkable scientist, pure mathematics degree, etc. Do you think that that rounded education, how significant is that in terms of developing leaders in the world?
The wider education, you mean, or the science education?
Well, the science, in addition to having had that childhood schooling of singing and dancing and theatre and confidence.
I think that it's very important to develop that, because ultimately, when you become a leader, especially in the big corporate world, you're successful because you're able to communicate your ideas. So those communication skills very early on in life are really important, and no less so now that we're into social media. I think it's become even more important. So really developing skills where you learn how to speak, you learn how to project your voice, and you learn how to present yourself, are still basic skills that every leader needs today. But also, I think if you grow up in a very close community, I think you also develop a lot of empathy with people. And I certainly think that successful leaders today are ones who are empathetic, particularly during the pandemic. Employees are looking to their CEOs and their leaders, first of all, to trust them. They've got much more trust in them than they have, say, in politicians, and also to lead them through tough times and to be empathetic to the way they're living their lives now.
That's so valid. Was there a moment, a really difficult defining moment in your childhood? Could you take us back in time to a challenging time? What was that? How did that impact you? How did you feel? And what was the light bulb moment that helped you pivot out of that?
Well, as far as childhood is concerned, I won a scholarship to a school that was an hour and a half commute from the village that I lived in. So I was traveling 3 hours a day from the age of 11. And I was the worst traveler in the world. I used to actually be physically sick on the bus on the way to school with travel sickness. And after this had gone on a couple of years and I was 13, I said to my parents, I would love to just go to the local school now and not have to travel to the city to be educated. And they were pretty empathetic with this, and they actually took me to the local school, and I met the headmaster, and then they did a number of tests on me and sort of to see how I would fit there academically and personality and so on. And the headmaster of that school said he felt that it was great that I'd won the scholarship and I should continue on. I think that really made my parents think, and within a year, my father had applied and got a job in the city, and we moved. So I was much closer to school, and I think that, that was an example of your parents really caring about how you felt about things and really helping you at a time that you felt that you were struggling.
And that's a remarkable act of selfless love and giving. How did that shift how you felt about yourself, having gone through that experience where your parents really stepped in and changed their lives significantly? I mean, how did that change the way you ended up feeling about yourself?
It was clear to me at that stage, even though I had, never traveled and I'd never left the place where I was born, that you could change one or two things in your life that could create something that made you feel comfortable and made you function at a really good level. And I've always carried that with me, with a view that I would change things if things weren't working for me in my career and in my life in terms of moving countries. And as far as my daughter was concerned, she actually changed schools 5 times before she was 12. And I was never frightened of that because I actually thought she was widening her experience and she was doing well. But if I had seen her struggling at any stage, then I would have changed my mind about it. And what I did with her when she was 12 was I moved back to the UK from America and put her into a school in the UK and kept her there for the next 6 years, the pre-university period,
Yeah.
because I felt that was such an important time to have some stability, to have comfort, to be able to really perform well. And it worked out really well for her. So I think I was probably, without really thinking about it too much, following in my parents' footsteps there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a remarkable different approach to change, which so often people struggle with. What strikes me about that, from your early concerns and anxiety around travel, you've traveled so much around the world. You've had a life of a lot of international travel. So coming back to your career, I mean, as vice chair of MasterCard, could you share with us we all have those ups and downs and turbulent times. What has been a more difficult moment to manage, and how did you feel at the time?
Well, I was at ABN AMRO Bank when it was taken over by Royal Bank of Scotland, and I was about 51 at the time. And I was on the operating committee of the bank. And I'd been talking to some consultants who were there during the hostile takeover, and I was saying, should I stay or should I go? And they talked to me and said, well, actually, I would think about going because you're very senior and things are not comfortable after a hostile takeover. I think we could all imagine that.
Of course.
So
Of
I
course.
actually stepped out of banking at that stage. And being 51, I was thinking to myself, what should I do? I knew I didn't want to go back into banking. That was the only thing I knew. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. It was akin to coming out of university and looking around the world and saying, what
Yeah.
should I be when I grow up? But you're
Yeah.
51.
Yeah.
And so at that stage, I was actually headhunted by a big restructuring company called Alvarez and Marsal, and of course ended up becoming effectively the CEO of Lehman Holdings in Europe through to the Middle East. And my life changed dramatically. But probably for about 6 months, I went through a period of trying to assess what do I want to do in life. And I wouldn't say it was such a terrible time because I wasn't concerned or nervous that I wouldn't find anything. But it was a time of great uncertainty, kind of thinking, where am I in my career? And is this the sort of plateau of my career? Am I going to do a mixture of things now? Of course, the opposite was clearly the case, because 3 years later, I joined MasterCard, and I'm still working executive today. So we're talking 14 years on.
Yes.
So I actually think often when these things happen, people step out of their corporate career too quickly.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky in my case that didn't happen to me, because the best times in my corporate life happened after that.
That's remarkable. And what was that light bulb moment for you, Anne? In those times of uncertainty, when often the emotions are very mixed, and sometimes there are elements of fear. I mean, during that period of uncertainty, what was that emotional journey like for you? And when did you have the light bulb moment?
Well, I had a number of light bulb moments. I mean, it's interesting because one of them was I was thinking, perhaps I'll go back to being a scientist. And I was very interested in renewable energy and the companies that were springing up at the time focusing on renewable energy. And I didn't make that move at the time, though subsequently, in the last year, I've become the lead non-executive director for a major government department in the UK that owns the whole net zero agenda. So some of the seeds that occur in these times of uncertainty come to fruition much later on in life. So I think having the time to think about things is important. Also, I've mentioned I have a daughter, and I was doing a very big job during all the time that I had her. I had 12 weeks off for maternity leave, and then when she was 2, I was running a huge department with thousands of people for Citibank, and as you say, flying around the world. And my daughter was a teenager when this big hostile takeover happened, and she was invited to a friend from school's house who we didn't know very well, and she said to me, "Oh, Mom, how shall I introduce you?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, just introduce me as your mom?" Kind of thing. And she said, "Oh no, but you're always senior executive of that and leader of this." She says, "I mean, you're just unemployed, aren't you?" And I had like 6 weeks off between the time that I left the bank and the time I joined the restructuring company. And I thought, never feel guilty about what your kids are thinking and feeling about your career, because probably they're really proud that you're, CEO of this or chairman of that.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
And I think often mothers don't feel that way.
That's such an interesting point. You mentioned you had a couple of light bulb moments. Can you share with us briefly what they are, and how did you pivot out of that moment of uncertainty in defining your new path?
Well, I actually felt that I would like to learn something new, but I also had the moment where I said, "Oh my goodness, I've got such deep career in financial services that I must be able to do something good with this." And I got invited for lunch with a guy called Tony Alvarez, who runs one of the biggest private restructuring companies in the world. And this was just pre the Lehman collapse. And he said to me, some big bank is probably going to go bust around here. We need people with operating experience who enjoy fixing things, who aren't afraid to sort of step forward and really put themselves out there and make decisions, often when you don't have enough information, and help pull something together, when you're in a crisis. And I sort of thought, it's interesting. All of these things that he's saying to me right now appeal to me. I love fixing things. I'm very good at managing through crises. I was the first woman offshore in Britain on the oil and gas rigs. And to do that, you have to learn how to escape from a burning platform and put out kerosene fires and drive lifeboats and escape from sunken helicopters. And it takes a certain presence of mind to do this in a crisis. And I thought, I like this. And the idea of being then able to bring your experience of banking to it, it was all sort of coming together. And he said to me, the only question mark that he had about me was, would I be any good as a consultant? Because I'd been so used to having thousands of people work for me. Would I be okay sort of stepping in and doing something on my own after all these years? But I actually felt good about that piece because I'd been a researcher, was used to working on my own. And actually, I loved it. Of course, I wasn't on my own very long because Lehman collapsed and I had to create a team and recruit people and do all the things I was used to. But I actually sort of felt a sense of freedom of, now I can really get my hands dirty and, do something instead of telling other people what to do.
That's interesting. And in that process, Anne, did you find that your mindset had to shift in any way? And if so, in what way?
My mindset. I think one of the things when you're in that type of company, you very strongly, you're an owner operator. You recruit the team, you pay the team out of the income that you earn. And I found that closeness to the business that you develop, you'll know this, Anne, because you're an entrepreneur, right? You have built your own business, you built your own team. And that feeling of success and satisfaction you get from the closeness of the business that you personally developed to the rewarding of people who've worked with you to make that a success is a wonderful feeling that actually is not the same feeling in a big corporate company because you're somewhat removed.
For sure. And within the corporate environment, I mean, like you, I've also worked in the corporate environment and in bigger multinationals and stuff. And you know, somebody we both know, Unilever, which was a remarkable experience earlier on in my own career. But from a corporate point of view, having gone through that transition in your career, did you find you have to shift your mindset within the corporate world when you step back into the corporate world?
Yes, was speed. Um, because basically you are making decisions with, you know, sometimes very little information, but you need to act, particularly in the Lehman case, because it was a live investment bank. So
Yeah.
time was of the essence. But things like the restructuring company showed me that you could move whole data centers and get entire dealing rooms set up within a matter of weeks. That these things are often planned for a year, 2 years, 3 years. You know, oh, we're going to set up a dealing room environment. It's going to look like this, and and you give yourself a lot of planning time and execution time. And I think that actually is something that we've learned from the pandemic as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know, that
absolutely.
the government had to learn to move at speed, sometimes unsuccessfully,
Yeah,
but sometimes successfully. Um,
yeah,
I think from the UK government's perspective, the purchasing of the vaccines was an example of how very quickly they put the department together, got somebody to to run it. It was a woman, and she was actually from the PE world. And instead of backing one horse, and probably because she'd had that risk management mindset, she just went across the board and ordered, vaccines from several different producers, so that the country very quickly had, a war chest in order to be able to fight this pandemic. So I think these are great examples.
yeah, they are. And of course, sometimes with speed, we do make mistakes, but you know, making mistakes is part of the learning, and then being
Yes.
able to course correct rather than, you know, being too hard on oneself or the company for making mistakes in terms of those kinds of circumstances.
Well, you're right. I mean, and the way to develop the latest technology is to sort of test and learn. I mean, that's often the way that things are done. Obviously, in the finance world, for example, in Mastercard, you can't be, issuing, a whole new, piece of technology out to 3 billion people on the planet without it being properly tested, back tested, and
Yeah.
ensuring that it all works. But still, I think the speed at which we do things is pretty impressive.
Yeah. You know, as vice chair of MasterCard, and what struck me, I mean, your role has enabled you to, it emboldens you and it encourages you and it calls on you to negotiate not only with business partners, with governments, with non-government organizations. You know, you're also a member of the Global Management Committee. With this global perspective, where the world is sitting right now, what are your biggest concerns around the challenges that are facing the world in this time of uncertainty and turmoil and turbulence? What are the big things that keep you awake at night?
Mm. Well, I mean, I don't think anybody on the planet today doesn't think about global warming, do they? I actually went up to COP26 in Glasgow this year, and I think there was some very interesting discussions had there. And as usual, when you have big global meetings, it probably hasn't gone as far as it should have gone.
Yeah,
Um, but one of the things that I think is very encouraging is everyone is thinking about it. My government department has an entire net zero plan by 2050. MasterCard has the same. Well, in fact, I think we pulled it back 10 years. So there's things like that going on. And at the same time, the world is changing quite dramatically in terms of technology.
sure.
Artificial intelligence is being used in everyday life all the time now, from our recommender systems on Netflix. You just
Yeah,
watched, Game of Thrones. Here's what you would like to watch. Um,
yeah,
and But also to customer service chatbots, to loans being made, through banks to the population using artificial intelligence. Of course, there's pluses and minuses with that because, everybody's human. Programmers are human, and you see a lot of biases being programmed into systems. In the case of the loans, starting in Sweden, when it seemed that women were getting fewer bank loans than at a time when they actually popped in and had a chat to the local bank manager. So I think we see these things. We have to be thinking about them deeply and correcting them before, you build something which is globally systemic. So there's things like that to think about. I think the pandemic has definitely shown us, well, we know we're not on a level playing field in terms of gender equality when it to the workforce. But I think the pandemic has highlighted that so much more. And on the one hand, as women, we've all been kind of hoping for more flexibility in our lives and so on. And the pandemic gave us that. I mean, this wonderful tool of Zoom that we're using. But on the other hand, it took it away because I'm not in this category, but many of the people who work with me are working parents. And that's been really tough, homeschooling. I think a lot of respect for teachers, by the way. My husband was a school teacher all his life. So, I think people are thinking, it's a harder job than you think. But I am in the spectrum that has an elderly mother. My mother's 91 and a half. And caring for the elderly during this time. And sometimes people are actually in the middle of that. They've got kids and they're caring for their elderly parents, and it's really tough. And we know that it hasn't fallen equally on women and men. The way that we design our working environment for the future is going to be very important for the business world. There's so many things. I mean, you could just go on forever with these thoughts.
Of course. And of course, I know the whole thing around, financial inclusion for women and women empowerment and diversity is something very close to your heart. I think previously I picked up in one of your interviews, you mentioned between 2015 and 2020, you brought in 500 million women, into the broader financial inclusion spectrum. I think you also made the point, which I found very interesting, the fact that we need gender diversity to create a more decent, ethical world. But what I heard you saying, Anne, is that there's a business case, for gender diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Can you just briefly talk to us about that? What is the business case? Why is this so close to your heart?
Absolutely. Well, McKinsey have done studies that say that companies that are more diverse at the top of the companies are outperforming those that are less diverse in the market, and they've got databases that they're using. It's difficult to say about cause and effect, by the way, because maybe those companies are just good companies. So I'm not proposing any sort of massive statistical relationship there, but empirically that's what they're seeing. I think the whole thing is that capitalism has moved to stakeholder capitalism these days. So instead of just waking up in the morning and caring what your stock price is and what the bottom line is, people are running businesses with a view to that you can't be successful in a failing world, and therefore you have to care about your employees, you have to care about the wider market that you serve, and you have to care about the society that you serve, because basically, first of all, if you think about your people, certainly you see it in the millennial generation, they vote with their feet. They're not going to join companies without purpose. If you think about your wider customer base, MasterCard, for example, has 3 billion consumers that we serve around the world. If we were giving very poor, messages out there about what we stand for, we were shown to be unfair in the way that we dealt with people in our supply chain, or the way that we employed people, or the way we talked about people in society. I mean, it would be completely bad for our business. You can just see that. And
Yeah.
I think on the society side, you mentioned the 500 million people. Well, they weren't all women, but there was a high percentage of women because women are more financially excluded than men. But
Sure.
I think the thing is, we did 500 million between 215 and 220 and 2020, and now we're going for our next 500 million. And I think the thing about that is, it's clearly good for our business. It's not, it's not us sitting here going, oh, well, this is a totally philanthropic exercise, because our business is a flow business. The more people that are connected to the internet, use our products, or are connected to the banking system, the better our business does. But there's nothing wrong with doing well by doing good. And I think you mentioned Unilever earlier, and that's another company that really thinks about these things.
Absolutely. What is your biggest fear for our generation and for the next?
I'm pretty afraid that, we don't act quickly enough in the case of climate change. And I don't think that we can rely on politics to get us where we need to be. I think that the corporate world has to step up to it. I think that we need a lot of technological innovation to bring us to 1.5 degrees. And I think I think it is a burning platform, but my fear is that many people haven't realized that yet. So, I think that, the fear of the kind of boiling frog syndrome, that the water's getting hotter, but we just haven't jumped out yet. Perhaps you coming from South Africa, this is more self-evident to you than other people on the planet. But it's a real fear. And I think, it's the big issue of our time.
Somebody that we both have a great love, admiration, respect for, Nelson Mandela, who, has been a remarkable leader, played a big role, around the world. Could you take us back in time? Is there a moment that stands out when Nelson Mandela, really touched your heart, opened your mind, inspired your leadership in the world?
Well, you mentioned that I traveled a lot, and I've been to South Africa many times. I think the first time that I heard about Nelson Mandela was, all the free Nelson Mandela concerts. But when I actually went to Robben Island, and I basically saw the living conditions and thought about what days must have been like on that island, it struck me that what an incredible presence of mind he must have had to continue day after day after day after day. I think he was in prison about 27 years of his life, wasn't he?
Yeah, 27.
And to come out of that situation and to become the president, the first Black president in South Africa, in his mid-70s, it made me really think about how long life can be, and how important it is to keep going to the end, to not give up on anything, and to feel that there's always something more to do, there's always something more to learn. I honestly believe that, and that's why I'm still in the corporate world, and that's also why I'm doing many other things besides, such as, leading the 30% Club, leading Financial Alliance for Women, government department in the UK. And I'm actually joining the board of a social impact fund as well, because I think this is something that's going to help the world get to where it needs to be. And I think Mandela epitomizes all of that he continued to keep going, but he learned, and he also is massive, as you said, influence all over the world, was spectacular. You can't even imagine it. And I'm sure he changed dramatically as a man, because obviously he was a political activist when he was younger, and yet he was, very much into reconciliation in order to be able to take his place as the president. And one of the things about that is you can't please all the people all the time. You know, but the thing is that as you become older, I think that you know, you benefit from being able to see lots of other people's points of view. I don't like the cancel culture at all. I'm very much a believer, you know, in the sovereign individual, that people should be allowed to think what they think and be allowed to express it. And I'm willing to listen to people with very different points of view to me. That's okay. I don't want to stop them speaking. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. How did, you know, having been to Robben Island a few times myself, I mean, you know, those are often very personal moments. How did you feel outside his prison cell, standing next to his prison cell or going into it?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that really struck me actually was it was a very, very sunny day, and it was very hot, and I think you know, there was like a chalk quarry that was like incredibly bright, and I thought, how could you not go blind actually quarrying this material? And I thought, how could you tolerate this day in and day out? You know, and I just felt sort of, well, sorrow really that people do this to other people. We have a lot of discussion that goes on today about people coping with mental illness and feeling under stress and this kind of thing. And it actually made me think, you know, what is it in some individuals that they can suffer such incredible things, and yet their mental capacity to come out of it and to, you know, move forward is so strong. If we could, you know, if we could capture that for everyone, you know, wouldn't that be fantastic?
There are those difficult moments, and, you know, you're absolutely right. And I guess, you know, what I'm curious about is, how did you harness that in your own life?
Well, you know, I think that my life's been absolutely wonderful. You know, when I look at other people, I actually think that I've been just incredibly lucky in my life. And in times when I've sort of felt, you know, down or whatever, I'm not the sort of person who what's the word? Who gets depressed, or who feels that things are unrecoverable at any point. I'm a very optimistic and happy person, and I think, and therefore I don't think I've gone through anything like that. But I do think that, you know, I do think that people respond to things in different ways, and if you can just keep that attitude and keep happy, and, you know, don't go to bed in a bad temper. I mean, I've been married 45 years. And, you know, I can honestly say that never, you know, had an evening where we said, right, that's it. You know, we're not speaking to each other, even though we've had our ups and downs over the years. So I've always tried to sort of solve things in the moment that they feel bad.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Do you think, coming back to Mandela, do you think his leadership example is relevant in the world today? And if so, in what way?
Completely relevant, because the world's facing a lot of adversity, as we've just talked about. And the world's facing a tremendous amount of change. And I think that what he showed was that, you know, there's many changes that are good, that you really need to be inclusive if you're going to move forward, geopolitically, or in business. I mean, you know, his whole idea of diversity, and the way that he came back and he dealt with people who'd imprisoned him. You know, I think it shows, you know, incredible presence of mind and leadership. And, you know, in the corporate world, you're going to disagree with people.
Of course.
In the political world, you are too. But sort of trying to find a way through that, and trying to find a way that works for everyone, that, you know, is the right thing to do. I think that that's kind of the way that his mind worked. And I think that's very relevant. And also, I mean, his communication skills. I know that he trained as a lawyer, but, you know, he had a wonderful way of putting things and saying things. And I never met him. I'm sure you did. And I imagine he was a very charismatic person.
Oh, incredibly, with a remarkable presence. But, you know, it's interesting what you say about his, you know, the power of his words and his presence, but, you know, so much more. And just how relevant that is today. If Mandela were alive today, what do you think he would be saying to the corporate boardrooms of today?
I think he would be saying, take responsibility for, you know, your place in the world. I think he would be saying, you are global institutions. You know, you need to function across many different geographies, serving so many different people. And you need to find a way to do business and to do the right business everywhere in the world. And I think he would be encouraging the corporate leaders, you know, to do the kind of things that some of them are doing: inclusion, purposeful leadership, you know, thinking through how to mend some of the supply chains that have been broken. I think he would probably be saying quite a lot about the distribution of vaccines and the impact of the pandemic. And I think he would be pushing for, you know, global research and, you know, for connectivity on a global basis to solve the world's biggest problems. I think he'd be a fantastic voice. And probably, sadly, one of the few voices in the political arena today.
Breaking away slightly to a couple of fun facts, and tell us, could you share something about your childhood that had a very happy, a fun, happy memory growing up as a child in your family?
Well, yes. My brother, I had an elder brother, I told you. He's also a mathematician, but he was he's quite a scientist. And I remember once my grandmother was looking after us, and she said, you know, well, where's John? And John had got a chemistry set for Christmas. I don't think anybody buys their kids chemistry sets anymore. I'm trying to think how old he was, about 11 or 12. Just as my grandmother asked this question, there's this enormous explosion from the outhouse, and my brother comes out very proud with no eyebrows. It's a good story. He did, you know, he became he had a very interesting career, but in later life was actually one of these brilliant mathematicians that dealt with swaps and things like this in the financial world. But you know, it's just one of those memories, obviously, because nothing bad happened. I mean, if anything bad had happened, that would have been awful. But you remember it as kind of funny. But,
well, I think things like that happen, you know. It's gratefully he was safe and sound, you know.
He was, but I mean, other things that he used to do, I mean, because he is 4.5 years older than me, and there'd be times I would be saying to him, oh, I can't get to sleep, you know, can't get to sleep, my mind's overactive and things like this. And he'd say, right, okay, I'm going to give you a little maths problem. And I would be about 7, you know, and I'd say, oh, okay. And he'd say, just calculate the number of seconds in a century, and don't forget the leap years, because I know what the answer is and I'm going to check it.
Wow.
And I'm going like, oh my goodness.
You had a tough maths teacher before you even got to school with your maths teacher.
Absolutely.
That's remarkable. What would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say keep that feeling of remembering to enjoy everything. Sometimes when things get tough, sometimes you forget to enjoy yourself. But what I have found is, certainly as I've traveled around the world and done lots of different things, actually took the time to stay a little bit longer and go to the place that I, spend some time in the place I was visiting and really enjoy the culture and meet the people. It made a difference to how well I understood how to do business. I could do that later on when my husband had retired and started to travel around the world with me a bit more. So I wouldn't have to fly home at the weekends, so we would go to Dubai, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, all in one trip, but sort of stay, a couple of days here and there at the weekends in different places, and really sort of soak up the whole atmosphere and enjoy life.
Yeah. Is there one thing about you that very few people know? Could you share one thing about yourself that very few people know?
Gosh, I mean, I'm such an open book. I'm not sure there. I'm not sure there is too much about me that people don't know. I'm a bit of a telly addict, and I absolutely love reading. I've retained my love of the theatre, and my daughter has a little theatre company of her own, and I'm very supportive of that.
Wonderful.
I think this combining the arts and businesses and sciences is something that's really important in my life.
Yeah, and it seems like you're passing it on to your next generation as well. So
hope so. I hope so.
So in our kind of final few moments, and when we talk about leading boldly into the future, what are your thoughts around boldness, moral courage, the importance of people developing that boldness in this moment in time in world history?
I think it's pretty vital. I think that it is also pretty lacking in some parts of society. I think that people look up to leaders that take bold actions, and I'm thinking of somebody like Angela Merkel, who I haven't met either, but I've watched her over the years and had tremendous respect for. If I think about the financial world, you do see people stepping up and really saying, we're not going to follow down this route because we think it's sailing too close to the wind in terms of regulation, or that's not a good thing to do for the population in general. I think that's really needed at this point in time. And I think ultimately people gain respect, even if, it can be very uncomfortable. And even if they don't, even if they're putting something like their jobs at risk and so on. I'm trying to think of an instance where I've seen someone do it and it hasn't worked out well longer term. And I honestly can't think of that, because usually the people who are capable of doing that are people who can forge their own path as well, and will bounce back.
In terms of managing the risks, in terms of managing any downside risks.
Absolutely. And I'm a great advocate that we get more women in business, because I do think that I've seen women take some really tough decisions. I see it in the political world for sure, but there's few and far between examples, because there's few and far between world leaders who are women. But I actually think that women, it's not to say that women are always more honest than men or anything like that. It's just some of the women leaders that rise to the top, they are bold. I mean, they've had to be to get there. Maybe that's a better way of actually saying it. I don't know, Janet Yellen, Ruth Ginsburg, yes.
Any final closing thoughts, broadly and from Bediba?
The world is not fair. And I think that Nelson Mandela, growing up at a time that he did with apartheid, well, he wasn't growing up it with apartheid, but his adult life and what happened in his own country. I mean, it wasn't even a question of fairness; it was grossly unfair and visibly so. And I think all the time when you're presented with a problem, and especially when it comes to people and you're making people judgments, I think it's important to constantly ask yourself that question about, am I really being fair about this? Or is there something that I've got to do to correct something that isn't a level playing field? I mean, I talked about bias in artificial intelligence. We know, for example, that artificial intelligence for people with black skin, it's been shown not to do the facial recognition as well. And it can lead to terrible consequences. So I think that you have to keep a very open mind and continually ask yourself. We're all brought up with our own prejudices. I mean, we see the world through stereotypes. And so we have to fight against our own stereotypical point of views to be able to move on. So I think remembering that and recognizing that and always challenging yourself about that is probably the best thing that you could do.
Yeah. Well, Anne, it's been such a delight to speak to you. Thank you so much. And we're so excited that you're a champion of change and part of this movement and part of helping the world to wake up, step up and speak out. I look forward to the next conversation. Come back and talk to us again. Thank you. God bless you.
Thanks very much, Anne.
The inspiring shoemaker's daughter, global corporate executive and board chair Anne Cairns, left me with 3 dominant thoughts. The world is unfair, but in an unfair world, it is music and the performing arts that can help us exercise leadership and inspire change, because music is the food of love. How many of you, like me, have experienced unconscious bias, a built-in disparity and inequality, where we become the outsider, the outlier looking from the outside in? Perhaps like being too thin, suffering from bulimia, or not thin enough, too young, too old, too black, too brown, or too white. An American dreamer in nowhere land, praying at the wrong house of worship, loving the wrong person, or living on the wrong side of the street. Or even perhaps being too rich to be accepted or too poor to gain entry. One of the most staggering inequalities in this current financially affluent world is the deepening divide between rich and poor. Forbes recently revealed that the world's richest 1% have captured 63% of global wealth. A Paris research group, the World Inequality Lab, reported that the world's wealthiest 10% own 76% of global wealth. The poorest half own a tiny fraction. In times of trouble, how many of you, like me, turn to music, to listen, to sing along or sing and dance? A time to emote, to release, to express those unexpressed emotions, to uplift our spirits and to inspire hope. Although William Shakespeare's famous opening line in Twelfth Night, "If music be the food of love, play on," is an irony in the context of the play, in real life and in leadership, it rings true. Music is the food of love. On music's biggest night, the 65th annual Grammy Awards ceremony, we saw a diverse melting pot of outliers and inliers come together to celebrate and to passionately perform. People like Beyonce, Harry Styles, Jay-Z, Bonnie Rate, and the multi-award-winning EGOT, Viola Davis, to name a few. With music at the center of their lives, history was made, the impossible became possible, and cherished dreams came true, not only for the performing artists, but for countless fans too. Music is the food of love. Music and the performing arts can build our confidence, help us exercise leadership, and inspire change in the world. And perhaps it's time for music and the performing arts to occupy more space in corporate boardrooms and offices, in congress halls and in college classrooms. And you too can tap into the power of music and the performing arts to build your confidence, to exercise leadership and inspire change, because music is the food of love. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking action, just one bold step at a time. One bold step for you, but together, a giant step for humanity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog, and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.